put a plastic bag over his head and then some cords, and then tightened it. Well, after that, I did Mrs. Otero. I had never strangled anyone before, so I really didn't know how much pressure you had to put on a person or how long it would take. But
was she also tied up there in the bedroom?
Yes, yeah, both their hands and their feet were tied up. She was on the bed.
Have you ever looked at someone and thought they just seem normal? The friendly neighbor who waves every morning. The man at church who helps set up chairs. The quiet coworker who never misses a day of work. Now imagine learning that same man spends his nights binding, torturing, and killing innocent people, and that for more than 30 years, no one had any idea who he really was. This isn't fiction. This is the story of Dennis Rader, the man who called himself BTK. If chilling real-life cases like this intrigue you, subscribe to stay with us as we unravel the darkness behind ordinary faces. Dennis Lynn Rader lived in Wichita, Kansas, a quiet Midwestern city where people left their doors unlocked and trusted their neighbors. To the outside world, he was a model citizen, a husband, a father, a church leader, and a respected employee at ADT Security Services. He wore pressed shirts, cut his lawn, attended Sunday service, and smiled politely when he passed you in the grocery store aisle. But that smile hid something unimaginable, because when the sun went down, Dennis Rader became someone else. A man consumed by dark fantasies, stalking strangers in the night, breaking into their homes, and carrying out acts of unimaginable cruelty. He called himself BTK, bind, torture, kill. The name wasn't given to him by the police. He gave it to himself. Rader was born in 1945 in a small Kansas town. The youngest of 4 children in a strict, emotionally distant household, he grew up quiet and withdrawn. His parents were often absent, and young Dennis learned to keep his thoughts and his obsessions to himself. Neighbors described him as polite but odd. What they couldn't see was that he'd already begun exploring violent fantasies, starting with small animals. He found pleasure in controlling life and death, in deciding when something would take its last breath. Those urges didn't fade with time. They evolved. As he grew older, Rader began secretly watching people. Women hanging laundry, couples walking home at night. He didn't just watch. He imagined what it would feel like to have complete power over them. That need for domination would define his life. Outwardly, he remained invisible. He graduated high school, served briefly in the Air Force, married a woman named Paula, and started a family. He was the kind of man you wouldn't think twice about, which was exactly how he wanted it. January 15, 1974. A cold morning in Wichita. The Otero family, Joseph, Julie, and their 2 children, Josephine and Charlie, didn't make it out of their home alive. When police arrived, what they found was unlike anything the city had ever seen. The family had been bound, tortured, and strangled. The bodies were posed, as if the killer wanted them discovered in that state. It wasn't rage, it wasn't random, it was deliberate and ritualistic. The crime scene shocked investigators. There was no clear motive, nothing stolen, just methodical brutality. What they didn't know yet was that this was the work of Dennis Rader, and that this was only the beginning.
Dennis Rader found a new outlet for his extreme need to control.
He had this job of the compliance officer, where he carried a gun, had a badge, was commissioned.
The dogs are somewhat territorial as well as vicious.
He was the king of Park City. He could go anywhere to do inspections. And I think maybe that satisfied his need for control, for power, for domination.
He was probably the most arrogant person I have ever met in my life.
He left Barbara Walters his business card with his handwriting on the back.
For Rader, the Otero murders weren't an outburst. They were a performance, a fantasy he'd been rehearsing in his mind for years. He left the house calm, collected, and confident. He'd finally done what he'd always dreamed of, and he wasn't planning to stop. That same week, as police scoured Wichita for leads, Dennis Rader went back to his normal life, clocked in at work, sat beside his wife at church, and tucked his children into bed. No one suspected a thing. In the months that followed, fear spread across Wichita. families double-checked their locks, people bought guard dogs. Still, there were no answers. Then a letter arrived, typed, precise, and taunting. The writer claimed responsibility for the Otero murders and demanded recognition. He signed it BTK, an abbreviation for Bind, Torture, Kill. He wanted fame. He wanted the world to know there was a predator among them. And the police, now realizing they were dealing with a serial killer, could only wait. Rader's next known victim was 25-year-old Nancy Fox in 1977.
Dispatcher? Yes, you will find a homicide at 843 South Pershing. Nancy Fox. I'm sorry, sir, I can't understand you. What is the address? 843 South Pershing. That is correct.
He broke into her home, bound her, and strangled her, again leaving behind a crime scene that spoke of control and obsession rather than impulse. Soon, another letter arrived, describing in chilling detail how he had ended Nancy's life. Each line dripped with arrogance. He wasn't just killing, he was performing. And he wanted the audience to applaud his genius. As police tried to connect the dots, Rader continued living two lives. He led church meetings. He installed alarm systems in homes, sometimes for people terrified of the very killer standing right in front of them. He shook hands, smiled, and went home to plan his next murder. By the late 1970s, Wichita had learned to live with fear. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Every knock on the door made hearts race. And somewhere in that same city, Dennis Rader sat quietly at his kitchen table, drafting another letter to the police. Because for him, murder wasn't just about control. It was about attention, and he was only getting started. If you want to see just how far Dennis Rader went to keep his mask of normalcy intact, and the one mistake that finally brought him down, make sure you're subscribed. You won't believe what happens next. In the years that followed, Wichita tried to move on. The fear faded slowly, like an old scar the city didn't want to look at anymore. People told themselves the killer was gone, maybe dead, maybe in prison for something else. But Dennis Rader was still there, hiding in plain sight. He had built a life that looked perfect from the outside: a steady job, a wife, 2 children, a house with a neat lawn and a quiet street. He taught his kids right from wrong, volunteered at church, and even became president of the church council. He enforced neighborhood rules as a compliance officer, handing out citations for grass too high or dogs not on leashes. To his community, he was the definition of order. But that sense of control was exactly what fueled his darkness. Every rule he enforced, every task he led, was another small taste of power. And when those small tastes weren't enough, he fed the hunger another way. Rader began stalking again. He called them projects. Women he selected carefully, sometimes at random, sometimes after a single encounter. He would watch them, take notes, learn their routines. He'd break into their homes when they weren't there, studying the layout, leaving and returning as if testing his own invisibility. His next known victim was Vicki Wegerle in 1986, a 28-year-old mother and musician. She was strangled in her home while her husband was at work. Rader later photographed her body, a twisted ritual that gave him what he called memories to revisit when he needed them. After Wegerle's murder, BTK disappeared again. The letters stopped. The phone calls stopped. For nearly 2 decades, it was as if the killer had vanished. But Rader hadn't gone anywhere. He was simply waiting, watching, living. He worked quietly at ADT, installing home security systems for frightened homeowners who still whispered about BTK. Ironically, some of those systems were installed by the very man they feared most. He smiled politely, took their checks, and left, knowing their locks and alarms would never stop someone like him. Years passed. His children grew up, the city changed, the world moved on, and Dennis Rader, now in his 50s, began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: irrelevant. For someone who fed on attention, the silence was unbearable. The world had forgotten BTK, and that wounded him more than any prison cell ever could. So he did the one thing no one expected. He brought himself back into the spotlight. In 2004, a local newspaper ran an article marking the 30th anniversary of the Otero murders. It mentioned that BTK had never been caught. For Rader, that was like lighting a fuse. Within weeks, a letter arrived at a TV station in Wichita. Inside were photographs of Vicki Wegerle's crime scene, images no one but the killer could have taken. Alongside them, a copy of her missing driver's license. The message was clear: BTK was back. Detectives who had long retired were called in. Younger officers who'd grown up hearing the name BTK found themselves chasing the ghost of a killer they thought was long gone. But this time, they had something Rader didn't: technology. Over the next year, Rader sent more letters, more puzzles, and more packages. He couldn't help himself. He enjoyed the attention too much to stop. Each communication felt like a performance, part confession, part ego trip. He mocked investigators, bragged about his intellect, and hinted that he might be ready to talk if they could play his game correctly. Then came the letter that sealed his fate. In early 2005, Rader asked police an almost laughably naive question. He wanted to know if a computer disk could be traced. He even asked them to be honest with him, said he trusted them. The police, of course, lied. They told him no, it couldn't be traced. So he sent one. The disk arrived at a local news station in February 2005. It contained a Word document with a message from BTK. Forensic analysts examined it, and within minutes, they found something Rader never expected: metadata. The file had been created on a computer registered to the Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita, and the last person to edit it, Dennis Rader. Detectives quietly pulled his records. They checked his old job, his family, his habits. Everything fit. They even retrieved DNA from his daughter's medical records, and it matched the biological evidence left at BTK crime scenes decades earlier. It was over. When officers finally arrested him outside his home, Dennis Rader didn't fight. He didn't run. He simply looked at them and said, "Why now?" During questioning, he confessed with a chilling calm. He spoke about his crimes as if he were reading from a diary, no emotion, no hesitation. He described how he stalked his victims, how he bound them, how he took photographs afterward to relive the experience. He admitted that the fantasy of power had consumed him, that the letters and games were his way of feeding that need for control. He talked about the murders like hobbies, neatly cataloged in his mind. In court, Rader pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. When asked to describe his crimes, he did so in clinical detail, explaining how he planned each attack, how he controlled his victims, and what he felt as they begged for their lives. What stunned everyone wasn't just the horror of what he did, it was the way he said it: calm, polite, almost proud.
I got this fantasy. I started working out this fantasy in my mind, and once that person become a fantasy, I could just loop it over. I'd lay in bed at night thinking about this person, the events, and how it's going to happen, and it became a real, almost like a picture show. You know, I wanted to go ahead and produce it, direct it, and go through with it, no matter what the costs were and the consequences. It was going to happen one way or another. Stalking stage is when you start learning more about your victims, potential victims. Went to the library. I looked up their names, that address, cross-referenced, and called them a couple of times. Drove by there whenever I could.
The courtroom fell silent as he recounted the Otero family murders, the death of Nancy Fox, and the others that followed. He even corrected himself at times, as if he wanted the record to be accurate. When the judge asked if he understood that he would spend the rest of his life in prison, Rader nodded and said, "Yes, sir."
All right, what did you do to Joseph Otero Sr.?
Joseph Otero?
Yeah,
Okay.
Joseph Otero Sr., Mr. Otero, the father.
I put a plastic bag over his head and then some cords and then tightened it.
And this was in the bedroom.
Yes, sir.
Did he, in fact, suffocate and die as a result of this?
Not right away. No, sir, he didn't.
What happened?
Uh,
Where were the children?
Josephine was on the bed and Junior was on the floor at this time.
So we're talking first of all about Joseph Otero. So you'd put the bag over his head and tied it, and he did not die right away. Can you tell me what happened in regards to Joseph?
He moved over real quick like, and I think tore a hole in the bag, and I could tell that he was having some problems there. But at that time, the whole family just went panicked on me, so I worked pretty quick. I got
What did you worked pretty quick.
Well,
What
I mean,
did you do?
I strangled Mrs. Otero, and she went out, or passed out. I thought she was dead. She passed out. Then I strangled Josephine. She passed out, or I thought she was dead. And then I went over and put a bag on Junior's head, and then if I remember right, Mrs. Otero came back. She came back and.
Sir, let me ask you about Joseph Otero Sr. You
Senior?
indicated he had torn a hole in the bag. And what did you do with him then?
I put another bag over it, or either that, or if I recollect, I think I put either a cloth or a T-shirt or something over his head, and then another bag, and then tighten it down.
Did he subsequently die?
Well, yes. I didn't just stay there and watch him. Then I was moving around the room. But
All right, so you indicated you strangled Mrs. Otero after you had done this. Is that correct?
now I went back and strangled her again, that finally killed her at that time.
He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Today, he sits in a maximum security cell at the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. Even behind bars, he remains as unsettling as ever, emotionless, analytical, and still convinced of his own intelligence. He occasionally writes letters to those who reach out, often referring to himself in the third person, as if BTK were someone separate from Dennis Rader. Psychologists who studied him describe him as a classic psychopath, manipulative, self-absorbed, devoid of empathy. For Rader, the murders weren't about blood or death. They were about control, about playing God in a world that never noticed him until he forced them to. His capture marked the end of a decades-long nightmare, but it also changed how law enforcement investigated serial crimes. The BTK case became a turning point for digital forensics, data tracking, and DNA matching, all because one man's ego couldn't stay quiet. Dennis Rader wanted to be remembered, and in the end, he got what he wanted, just not in the way he imagined. He wasn't a monster hiding in the shadows. He was a neighbor, a husband, a church leader, and a father who turned those roles into his greatest disguise. So the next time someone tells you that evil has a look, remember this. Sometimes it wears a name tag and smiles at you on Sunday morning. If you found this story disturbing, remember, the most dangerous monsters are often the ones who seem the most ordinary. Make sure you're subscribed for more true crime stories like this one. We'll see you in the next case.